Oxford interview isn't an interrogation. It's a conversation between people deeply interested in their subject, the academics and you.
Hi everyone, it's Elvi from ElvisOxfordCoach. I'm an Oxford Biochemistry graduate and science communications expert. Today we're going to be talking about how to have a successful Oxford or Cambridge interview. I'm going to be going through 6 top tips that are going to apply for all subjects, and then at the end I'm going to be specifically focusing on 3 tips in more detail that apply specifically to biochemistry interviews. Let's crack on.
Top tip number 1. Make sure you prepare a structure for how to answer the very typical and predictable intro questions, such as why Oxford, why Cambridge, why this subject, okay? These are really common questions that often get asked at the start of an interview, and they're very easy to prepare for. In fact, you can kind of go off on a monologue about why you think Oxford is so great and why you think your subject is so great. And it's very easy to prepare this. You know, for Oxford or Cambridge, perhaps you can pick out something that interests you about the course structure compared to your other UCAS options, or perhaps you can talk about the collegiate teaching system within the university. What you don't want to do is just say something along the lines of, well, Oxford and Cambridge are very prestigious and, I think it will look good on my CV if I study here. If you can give a cohesive and engaging and passionate and convincing answer to these intro questions, it will put the interviewers in a really positive frame of mind. You'll begin to feel really comfortable and you won't be so nervous when you actually end up answering the more subject-related questions that are obviously going to be a little bit more challenging. So, top tip number 2, get comfortable. Practice thinking out loud. Now, more expressive students, perhaps students that are applying for humanities or language subjects, this won't be so much of a problem, but particularly for science students, there is no real assessment as part of your, A-level or IB course. Verbally, all of it is done through studying for exams and writing down your answers. Unfortunately, this isn't the format of the Oxford interview. You need to feel comfortable thinking out loud and explaining processes out loud. So for me, one of the most common ways that I did, not only to prepare for my interview, but also I ended up using it for just revision for my end of year exams generally, was to just practice talking out loud about a topic. So, start with one topic and see how much information you can explain in a sequential way. And then potentially go from one topic to the next. Similar to that, top tip number 3, don't rush straight to the answer. The thinking out loud that I was talking about, that's essentially the equivalent of the working out that you would do in a maths or chemistry paper, right? The interviewers are very interested in how you think, in how you get to the final answer. Sometimes students really want to get straight to the answer to sort of show that they know everything, but really you're being assessed on your thinking. And particularly you're being assessed on your thinking to explain like a sequential process, right? So you might be given a very broad, open-ended question, such as, is the root of all violence political unrest or discontent? Or perhaps a more biological question might be something like, if I wanted to add a new amino acid to the genetic code, how would I do that? Clearly, these aren't the types of questions you can just answer by, giving a one-sentence response. You need to talk step by step, explain the process. You'll be given a lot of marks. You'll be assessed on the clarity of your thinking and the originality of your thinking. The interviewers will reward students that posit interesting hypotheses. What's more, the interviewers are going to work with you to help you get the right answer. So if you're explaining your thinking, the interviewer can correct you towards the right answer. You work with the interviewer. So, top tip number 4, make sure you have a very good understanding of all the subject supercurriculars that you've mentioned on your personal statement. Now, the interviewers may not ask about every single thing on your personal statement, but if they do ask about one thing on your personal statement and you can't really explain about the additional reading that you've done and what you learned from that, it's going to come across as a bit of a red flag. And so not only do you want to understand the additional reading that you've done, the content that's beyond the syllabus, but also the content on the syllabus that underpins that advanced reading. A good response when asked about something you've mentioned in your personal statement reinforces the fact that you're a diligent student who can study independently and consume advanced material. So here they would be assessing, is this student a hard worker, and does this student have the capacity to understand complex things within this subject? Tip number 5, practice with unseen material. It's now becoming increasingly common that as part of the interview process, students are sent an article or a graph to look at shortly before the interview to then discuss in the interview and then use that as a stimulus for a talking point. So how can you prepare for something like this? You can just use the resources that come up in your day-to-day life, your day-to-day internet browsing. So for example, let's say you're reading an article that you find interesting on an online broadsheet newspaper, and there's an infographic in there. Now, take some time to really analyze that. What interpretations can you draw from that graph? What further investigations would you like to do on the basis of the initial results? Could there be something wrong with how the analysis was conducted? Maybe the conclusions that the authors make aren't actually supported by the graph. Okay, maybe there's some bias there. This kind of thing is going to be really useful for familiarizing yourself with unseen material. You've done all this wonderful reading for your personal statement, this supercurricular reading. You need to keep doing it constantly. You need to be consuming interesting material, particularly stay on top of relevant current events that may relate to your subject. This could be, new scientific developments. It could be political developments. You need to constantly be consuming new information and be prepared to discuss it. So finally, top tip number 6, and arguably I think this is the most important one. You need to show genuine enthusiasm, enjoyment and serious engagement with the questions being asked in the interview. This can involve really basic things such as positive body language. Don't fidget, don't scratch yourself, use your hands to express yourself in a passionate and convincing way. Obviously not in such a dramatic way that distracts from the discussion. You want to express your genuine appreciation of the difficulty of the question that you're being asked, right? It's designed to be difficult, but it's designed to be fun as well. And, you want to express that, that is an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it in this way. Based on the new information that you've given me, that changes what I was initially going to say. You want to genuinely treat it as you and the interviewers getting towards the truth or towards a right answer. Okay? The Oxford interview isn't an interrogation. It's a conversation between people deeply interested in their subject, the academics and you. You need to show interest in solving the problem. You need to work with them. So that means take on board their tips. When they try and correct you and redirect you, go with it. Don't resist. And offer your ideas. Ultimately, the Oxford interview assesses teachability, how interested and how good are you in the tutorial format and how easy you are to work with, i.e., do you accept their hints? Are you able to correct your thinking? This kind of thing. Now, if you're finding this content useful so far, please do make sure that you leave a like and a subscribe. It really doesn't cost anything, and it's of great help for me to grow the channel and make sure this content reaches more and more students aspiring to study at Oxford and Cambridge. Now, moving on to the biochemistry specific tips.
So, top tip number 1 for biochemistry specifically, there are certain key topics for revision that you must really focus on, because essentially they're going to underpin the basis of all the questions that you're going to be asked about in a biochemistry interview. Remember, a interview, regardless of what subject you're going to be doing, is going to be in part underpinned by the knowledge you already know from your syllabus, but applying it in unfamiliar context. So let's take a look at what I think some of these key topics for revision are. Key topics that I would recommend for revision: dipeptide structure, so that's the functional groups, the amine group, the carboxylic acid group, the peptide bond, and also the bonding, so a really detailed understanding of the electronic structure, how many bonds, how many lone pairs, what's the behavior of the double bonds, the bond angles, everything you can think of, really. Protein folding, so, you should feel comfortable understanding and talking through the primary structure, which is obviously coded for at a genetic level, all the way to secondary structure, tertiary structure, and then quaternary structure. You should be able to explain that process. And then on top of that, any post-translational modifications. DNA and nucleotide structure. So, the nucleotide structure is obviously the organic base plus the sugar plus the phosphate. And you should feel comfortable drawing these out and talking about the key functional groups. You should have a good understanding of acid-base chemistry, and pKa calculations. Remember that biological reactions take place in water, pH 7, largely speaking. So that's going to affect the acid-base behavior of functional groups that have the capacity to behave as acids or bases. You want to talk about polarity, electronegativity, intermolecular forces. All these things are going to apply, for example, in terms of the protein folding. Okay, you want to be able to do calculations of concentration and molar calculations. You should feel comfortable with reading a periodic table and working out a molecular mass. It sounds really basic, but students can trip up on these simple questions in an interview context. And also redox chemistry. For example, that applies to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. Now, the second top tip that I want to give is you want to think in terms of general biological principles. And so this is related to the first point, but it's more like a general way of thinking about things. So, base pair hybridization between nucleic acids. So obviously you have your DNA that's double-stranded and you have your hydrogen bonding. But the same applies for DNA to RNA and maybe even RNA to RNA, right? So it's a general principle. Nucleic acids can form hydrogen bonds with each other if the bases are complementary, okay? Protein structure determines function. That should be fairly straightforward to understand, right? If you think about enzymes, the active site, that's only possible, the function of an enzyme, because of the shape of the active site. The general flow of information from DNA to protein, okay? You need to understand that process in order to be able to discuss potential points where gene expression, protein production could be regulated. Understanding that the ultimate purpose of respiration is ATP production, and ATP is a general sort of energy currency of the cell, i.e. it can be used by enzymes to release energy to do work. you have to remember that in biological systems, there's homeostasis. So if you talk about, well, the cell could, change the pH, well, it's not going to do that. Or, if you're going to increase a rate of reaction in a biological system, it's not going to be done by raising the temperature. Okay. Enzymes control reactions, and enzymes themselves are proteins that are coded for genetically. So, if you're asked about like a bioengineering question, about like, I want to introduce a new enzyme into a system, one of the things you need to do is actually have the gene in the first place that makes the enzyme. Okay. Additionally, you need to think about hydrophilic and hydrophobic compounds. A charged molecule is not going to go through a membrane, so it's going to go through a channel protein. Hydrophobic interactions in the case of an unfolded protein interacting with a chaperone. And also, furthermore, that the cell is compartmentalized. You have the mitochondria, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, the Golgi. How are they connected? Where are they in the cell? And how do they interact with each other in various biological processes? Finally, I'd recommend that you get in the habit of cross-subject thinking. So at A-level or IB, you're taught biology and chemistry in very separate, unconnected ways. A lot of the biochemistry content, a lot of the questions that you're going to be asked in interview will require you to integrate biology and chemistry content from A-level together and then apply it in unfamiliar situations. So, let me give you an example. With a student that I was working only a few weeks ago, we were having a discussion about protein folding. And as we were talking about it, I was really trying to give hints that protein folding is an energetically driven process. Yet the student not once mentioned energy in the conversation. Why? Well, because when you're taught protein folding in biology, you're not taught about how that the protein, when it's folded, is in its most energetically stable state. And as it folds, it's giving off energy to the system and itself is becoming more energetically stable. So really being able to integrate between biology, chemistry, even physics can really help. I hope you found this video really useful and informative. If you're a student who's applied for biochemistry or a related subject and you feel like you need more personalized support to help you prepare for the interview in the start of December, please do get in touch with me. You can find me online at www.ElvisOxfordCoach.com. All my contact details are in the description. Example biochemistry interview question and how to solve it, please check out the other video on my channel where I discuss in detail, step by step, applying some of the top tips that I discussed in this interview, such as breaking down your answer in steps and explaining the process rather than rushing through to the answer. If you follow all the tips that I've outlined in this video, you'll vastly increase your chances of having a favourable outcome at the end of your interview. Good luck.